All right, good morning, everybody. And today's share is sponsored. So today's share is sponsored by Malka Greenhouse, Le'iloi Nishmat Edna Yachat Bat Avram, and Be'ezrat Hashem, the Divrei Torah should be Le'iloi Nishmata. We've been discussing generally the concepts of Kiddush and Havdalah, and the last thing we were discussing is the minhag that is already recorded in the Gemara itself, of making Kiddush in the Beis HaKnesset Friday night. So this is a very, very old minhag. Right? The Talmud records that there was Kiddush beBeis HaKnesset. And the Gemara then has a machlokas, I'm reviewing a little bit, between Rav and Shmuel, these are the two greatest Amoraim, whether a person is Yotzei with the Kiddush beBeit Knesset, meaning assuming that my wife was there or I'm not married and I heard Kiddush and Shul, can I be Yotzei Kiddush? Rav actually says, you are Yotzei Kiddush. You don't have to make Kiddush again. I heard Kiddush and Shul, I'm Yotzei. Shmuel, on the other hand, says, the Kiddush of Beit HaKnesset is not Motzi you because of a very important rule, and we paskin like Shmuel, Ein Kiddush Ela B'makom Seuda. Kiddush is valid only if it is in the place where you have your meal, and therefore any Kiddush that you heard which was not in a place where you had your meal is not a valid Kiddush, and therefore I got to go home and make Kiddush again. So the Gemara then asks, according to Shmuel, the obvious question, if the Kiddush in the Beis HaKnesset is not a valid Kiddush because it's not a place of a meal, why do we make such a Kiddush the Beis HaKnesset? And Shmuel's answer is because there were orchim, there were poor people, poor guests who had no place to go, and they used to feed them in the shul itself. So for them, it is a makom seuda. For everybody else who's not eating, they're not yotzei. This is what the Gemara says. Now, we paskin like Shmuel. The Gemara actually tells us, which is, by the way, I don't want to get into that, that's a peripheral rule, but that itself is a yotzei min haklal, because generally speaking, on matters of ritual, when you have a machlokas Rav and Shmuel, we normally follow Rav. But it's interesting that the principle of Ein Kiddush Ela B'makom Seuda, which is Shmuel's principle, is actually the halacha l'maisa. Now, let's stop for a moment there. What is the source of that rule? What is the source that Kiddush has to be linked to some type of meal? I'll discuss later what is a meal. That's another question. So the Rashi and his grandson, the Rashbam, both, in fact, it's very interesting for reasons that are not clear to me. You know, Rashi had daughters. Rashi had no sons, although Rashi's daughters were said to be very, very learned women. There's a legend they wore tefillin that has not really been substantiated, but there is more of a proof that they knew a lot of the Talmud, etc. You know, if you have a father Rashi who doesn't have a son to learn Gemara with, one would imagine that Rashi did learn with his daughters. And the daughters also married very esteemed Talmidei Chachamim, and the grandchildren of Rashi, the children of Rashi's daughters, became the founder of the school of the Tosfos, the additional notes. So, for example, Rashbam, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, was Rashi's grandson, and his younger brother was Rav Yaakov ben Meir, who is known as Rabbeinu Tam. So it's interesting that the Rashbam is probably best known for his commentary on Chumash. If you have a Mikros Gedolos, you will see the commentary of the Rashbam, and it's very, very fascinating because the Rashbam on Chumash is very brief, very, very abridged, and extremely pshat-oriented. He doesn't bring in any midrashim, he just goes with the words, etc., and the like. And in fact, he even records, fascinatingly, in Parshas Vayeshev, a debate that he had with his grandfather, Rashi. He says, I said to my grandfather, you know, you bring in too many midrashim, you don't go into Pashat Pshat, even though Rashi always says he's doing Pashat Pshat, he says, you bring in midrashim, and, you know, you need to focus on the literal meaning of the words. He says he was arguing with his grandfather, and he records that his grandfather said if he would have more time, he would rewrite his commentary to incorporate more in Yonim of Pshat. Now, my personal speculation is that Rashi was probably tired of arguing with his anacle, so he just said, yeah, okay, you're right. Pushed him away. But be it as it may. Now, what's interesting is, though, that the Rashbam also wrote commentaries on Gemara. And we don't have a lot of his commentaries. We're not even sure how much he wrote. But, for example, in Maseches Bava Basra, Rashi's commentary only goes until the middle of the second chapter, and therefore the bulk of the Maseches is the commentary of the Rashbam. Now, you see immediately a difference between Rashi's style and the Rashbam style. Rashi was quite literally a genius at brevity, at being able to communicate a maximum amount of meaning in the smallest amount of words. As soon as we move to the Rashbam, everything is huge. Things that took Rashi 5 words would take the Rashbam 5 lines. And that is why Maseches Bava Basra is the largest tractate of the Babylonian Talmud. It is not because it has the most words. In fact, it does not. But if you ever look at a Bava Basra, you'll see the pages are very short, because the Rashbam's commentary is voluminous. So it's fascinating that in Chumash, the Rashbam's style is extremely brief, and in Gemara, his style is extremely discursive. Now, we even have a controlled experiment. In other words, in a sense, Bava Basra is not a control because I don't have Rashi on those other pages. But there's one part of Shas where we have both Rashi and Rashbam on the same page. Why the Rashbam wrote it, it's not clear to me. And that's Arvei Psachim, the 10th chapter of Psachim that talks about the laws of the Seder. We actually have Rashi and Rashbam. So you can quite literally do a controlled experiment as to the difference between Rashi and Rashbam on a line-by-line basis. And there you again see it. You again see it. 5 words for Rashi, 5 lines Rashbam. You can mamish compare it. Okay, but be it as it may, these were the Balei HaTosfos, the founders of the school of the Tosfos and the like. So both Rashi and the Rashbam in Arvei Psachim bring a single makor for Ein Kiddush Ela B'Makam Suda, and this is a drasha based on a pasuk in Yeshayahu, V'karasa LaShabbat Oneg. You shall proclaim that Shabbat is a delight, a day of delight. So the simple meaning is, Oneg Shabbos, you should enjoy Shabbos, but the drasha is, B'makam Oneg, the place of your enjoyment, which is your eating and drinking, that is where you should proclaim Shabbos, which is Kiddush. V'karasa LaShabbos Oneg, B'makam Oneg, there is the kriya, the calling of Shabbos, which is Kiddush. Right? So be it as it may, this is the rule of Ein Kiddush Ela B'Makam Su'uda. So this is a very important principle. You are not Yotzei Kiddush except in the place where you have what is halachically defined as a meal. This is true Friday night. This is true Shabbos day. Now I'll just digress for a moment. What is the halachic definition of a meal? Meaning, what do I have to eat in order for the Kiddush to count? If I don't eat what is halachically a meal, I don't get Kiddush. So, obviously, washing for bread is certainly a meal, that's for sure. But most of the time, in a Shabbos morning Kiddush, I don't necessarily want to wash for bread. We also paskin a kezayis of mizonos, and that's what most people do. An olive's volume of cake, enough cake, in other words, to make a bracha acharona of al hamichya. Or the third option is a whole revius, I'll give you the measure in a moment, of wine. Meaning to say, if I heard Kiddush and Shul, I'm not Yotzei unless I have a meal. So the meal can be bread, the meal can be mizonos, or the meal can be what is called a revius of wine, which is 4 fluid ounces, meaning I have to drink, meaning it's not enough that the guy who made Kiddush drank. The guy who made Kiddush is not a meal for me, right? You can't be mitzi somebody in eating, right? I can make a bracha for you, but I can't eat for you. So when I say a revius of wine, I'm not referring to what the guy who made Kiddush had. I am only Yotzei Kiddush if I drink, well, bread, mizonos, a revius of wine. The person that hears it, yeah, any person. You, if you want to be Yotzei with Kiddush, you have to do one of those three things. Now, which means, in other words, chopped liver, egg salad, herring, gefilte fish, doesn't count. Now, here is, crackers or mazonos. Now, if it's Pesach crackers out of potato starch, they don't count either. By the way, that is a huge problem, actually, for people who keep the minhag of Sharuya, of not eating gebraks, of, what do you do at a Pesach Kiddush? Because, so wine would work. Matzah you'd have to wash for, right? And some say egg matzah might be permitted, but on the other hand, Ashkenazim don't eat egg matzah during Pesach. So you got a real problem. Maybe the only option would be you can drink a revius of wine. A revius is 4 fluid ounces. Or you could wash on matzah or whatever it is, because if the cakes do not have matzah meal in them, the potato starch cake is shahakol. A shahakol does not count for a seuda. Now, here's the other thing you need to know. If what you're eating does not count as a meal, you're actually not allowed to eat it because you're eating before Kiddush. You see the problem? In other words, I'm not allowed to eat until I hear Kiddush. So you made Kiddush, but I'm not Yotzei with that Kiddush because I'm not having a seuda. If I'm not Yotzei with that Kiddush, I'm not allowed to have the herring and the chopped liver and the gefilte fish and whatever it is. Because until I'm Yotzei Kiddush, I have an Isser of Achila. This is very important. So if you're on any type of special diet, you got to consider this. Meaning if you don't have cake, you don't have mizonos, you can't just take a piece of fish at a Kiddush because you're not Yotzei of the Kiddush because you didn't have a Seuda. So you have to figure out wine or grape juice might be the best option. Once I have a revius of wine or grape juice, I could then have gefilte fish and herring or whatever it is. Right. So this is the principle of Ein Kiddush Ella B'Makam Seuda. It's a very, very important principle, and that is why people are not Yotzei with the Kiddush in the Beit Knesset unless they have a Seuda. Now, one thing. So we have a machlokas, I mentioned last week, between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, that Bizman Hazeh, where people generally do not, unless they're making an event, but generally poor people or whatever, itinerant people do not eat their meals in the Shul, they're invited to people's homes. So, in effect, nobody is Yotzei Friday night. Should we make Kiddush B'Beit Knesset? So, Rav Yosef Karo, Paskins, that since the only justification for Kiddush B'Beit HaKnesset is the orchim who eat in the Beit HaKnesset, if you don't have orchim who eat in the Beit HaKnesset, you should not make Kiddush in the Beit Knesset Friday night. This is the Shita of Rav Yosef Karo, and this is the Psak of Sfardim. The Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserlis, who codifies the Ashkenazic customs of Germany, Poland, Russia, says that this is a takanat chachamim, meaning the chachamim made an enactment to make Kiddush in Shul because of orchim, and consistent with the way rabbinic laws work, even if the particular reason no longer applies, we still follow the takana, which therefore means that the minhag of Ashkenazim in a Beis Knesset is to make Kiddush Friday night, even though nobody is Yotzei. Now, the minhag of yeshivos, however, for some reason, is they do not make Kiddush in Beis Knesset. So it's not clear to me exactly where the origin of that came. If the yeshivos, whatever, Mir, Slobodka, the great yeshivos of Europe, they were Ashkenazic institutions. They were not Sephardic institutions. I mean, there may have been Sephardim in them, but they were located in Ashkenazic kehilos. So why I don't actually know the history that well on this prat. Why the custom developed in yeshivos not to make Kiddush B'Beit Knesset is a little problematical, because the Ramah does record it as the minhag of Ashkenazim to make Kiddush in the Beis Knesset Friday night. That's correct. But there's a reason for that. Yeah, the reason. Okay, let me. The reason in Eretz Yisrael they don't do it is because the Vilna Gaon differed with the Ramah, Maybe that's why the yeshivas did it as well. Although the yeshivas in Europe didn't always follow the Vilna Gaon's minhagim, but the Ashkenazic standard minhag of Eretz Yisrael is based on the Talmidei Hagra, or at least in Yerushalayim for sure. In Yerushalayim, in fact, that is actually why you may wonder. We say Birkat Kohanim every day. If there's a Kohen, we duchen every day. Now, those of you who remember your prior lives, you know that in Chutz La'aretz, Birkat Kohanim is only recited on Yom Tov. Now, once again, this is interesting. I'm glad that you brought it up. It gives me a chance to digress. The Ramah records that even though the halacha l'chayre should be that Birkas Kohanim is every day, and Rav Yosef Karo says that, and that's why Svardim in Chutz La'aretz do it every day. But the Ramah says the minhag of Ashkenazim is only to do it on Yom Tov, and he gives a very strange reason. He says that Birkas Kohanim requires that the Kohen be besimcha. The Kohen must be happy. It says, Tov Lev Hu Yivarech. Only one who can give a bracha is one who has a goodness of heart. And in Chutz La'aretz, we're always grouchy except on Yom Tov. Even on Shabbos, our simcha is not complete. On Yom Tov, we're all in a better mood. We're happier. Although I'm not sure with the 3-day Yom Tov, I'm not sure if that's true for the women. But therefore, now, this is a very dochik reason, because this is such a subjective reason. I mean, happy, not happy. I mean, listen, some people are grouchy even on Yom Tov, right? So, and some people are happy every day. I mean, what are you saying? You're taking away a mitzvah d'oraisa because you're making a judgment that Kohanim are not happy. So because of this, the Vilna Gaon himself, who of course lived in Vilna, was Ashkenazi, paskind that Ashkenazim should also duchen every single day. And in his private shul in Vilna, called the Gaon's Klois, private shul in Vilna, he wanted to institute the practice, but it is recorded that every time he wanted to do it, the shul burnt down. Meaning there was kind of a siman min hashamayim that he should not deviate. Well, there are two interpretations. Either this was for the kavod of the Ramah, don't argue with Ramah, or generally Chutz La'aretz was not deserving of the bracha Birkas Kohanim. But Svardim do duchen every day, and because of this, some Gedolei Yisrael, like Rav Steinman, when Rav Steinman came to America to visit, he would make it a point to daven in a Sephardic minyan because he wanted to hear Birkas Kohanim every day. He was Ashkenazi, but his minhag was the minhag. So the point is, you're right, that it's the minhag hagra to do it. So when the Talmidei Hagra came to Eretz Yisrael, they wanted to be miyased their Rebbe's minhag. And that is why, that actually explains why if you go north, if you go to Haifa, you go to Tzfat, you go to Tiberia, you will actually find that many kehillos do not duchen every day. They actually have a very strange minhag. They only duchen Musaf of Shabbos. Now, the basis of this is the following. The Garin of the Ashkenazi Yishuv, pre-Medina, in Yerushalayim, and the area of Yerushalayim, was the Talmidim of the Gra. The Garin in Tveria and Tzfat of the Ashkenazi, Sephardim were always here, is the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov. So the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov wanted to follow the minhag they had in Europe of only duchening on Yom Tov, but the local Sephardim didn't like that because they duchened every day, so they came to some compromise that the Ashkenazim would duchen once a week on Shabbos. And that's because it wasn't through the influence of the Gra. But the Shita of the Gra was actually to duchen every day. And to go back to our topic, that is why, as well, Kiddush is not recited in Beit Knesset in Yerushalayim, primarily because that was the minhag of the Gra, who paskined like Rav Yosef Karo in that part. Yeah.
Yes. So my husband and I, many years ago, were in Krakow, and we were in Shabbos morning in the Rosh Shul,
Yeah.
and there was a tour of the yeshiva boys with their Magid or
Yeah.
whatever in the Shul
Yeah.
from Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah.
And they went up to Duchen, and my husband got so upset, but didn't help. He said, in the Ramah Shul.
Your husband was 100% right. I will tell you. I was once also in the Ramah Shul. Many Hasidim come to Poland, go to Rabbi Melech's Kever, different. I'm saying when they daven in the Ramah Shul, they daven Nusach Ashkenaz. That's what I'm saying. Meaning, the covet of the Ramah is in the Ramah's show. Even someone who davens the Hasidic nusach is nusach Sfarad, they will daven nusach Ashkenaz. So your husband is 100% correct. In the Makam of the Ramah, you certainly do not go. As the pasuk says, what Achashverosh says, the Gemara quotes it. Hagam lichbash esamalka imi babayis. Do you want to conquer the queen in my own house? So your husband's instinct was very, very emes in that way. By the way, it's so amazing. The Ramah died such a young man. The Ramah died, I think it was at 47, a very, very young man. And just imagine the godless, the authoritativeness of his psukim for the whole Ashkenazic world, the Rav of Krakow. He died on Lag BaOmer, and one of the Maspidim, it's a long aspect, wanted to mention 33 milas of the Ramah, Lag BaOmer, 33. So he went through mila after mila after mila, the greatness of the Ramah. Yeah.
Logically,
Yeah.
you're just supposed to be happy on Shabbat.
Yes,
Just on the
but you know, it is interesting. It is interesting that the mitzvah of V'samachta, in other words, there actually is, there's oneg, it's hard to, these overlap. There's a mitzvah of oneg Shabbat. It does not, the Torah does not use the word simcha. Simcha is only used about the Yom Tovim. It's an interesting question. But technically, say again? No, it's in the davening. Yeah, no, you're correct. It certainly is. But that may refer, interesting, Yismechu b'malchuscha might be in the future, meaning those who keep Shabbos will have the simcha of the kingdom of God when Mashiach comes, right? So it's not necessarily talking about the Shabbos itself. Well, you should, well, okay. Well, in Ritzei we say, Shelo tehei tzara v'yagon v'anacha. So it's expressed at least in a negative sense. You shouldn't be sad on Shabbat, but it doesn't necessarily explicitly state that one should be happy. I'm sorry.
What about if on at the Kiddush at Shul you drink whiskey and not wine? Does that count?
Okay, so your question is really two different questions, and let me analyze it. Question one is, can I make Kiddush on whiskey, and how much whiskey do I have to make Kiddush on? Okay. Because normally you make Kiddush on wine or grape juice. Does whiskey count? So we have three opinions about Kiddush on whiskey. Opinion number one is you cannot make Kiddush on whiskey. It has to be wine or grape juice. Opinion number two is you can make Kiddush on whiskey, but it has to be on a full 4 ounces, which will kind of knock you out. And then the third opinion, which you probably have seen a lot among Hasidim, is that they make Kiddush on whiskey, and they use a shot glass. That during the day. Now that opinion you should not rely upon. If you're going to use whiskey, it should be a whole big thing. Now, whiskey, a shot glass. Now, the second question you're asking is, let's assume a proper Kiddush was made on wine or grape juice. Can the whiskey count as a meal? That's the different question. And the answer is no. Whiskey is not a meal, although some alcoholics kind of make their meals whiskey. Once again, it has to be bread, it has to be mazonos, or it has to be 4 ounces of wine or grape juice. Otherwise, it is not halachically a meal. Now, again?
What about a liqueur?
So, well, it depends. There's a liqueur that has wine in it. I mean,
It has more like whiskey.
well, once again, if it's not wine or grape juice, it doesn't count. Liqueur is.
That's what was different about whiskey.
Well, the point is not that it's whiskey. The point is that it's what it's not. It has to be wine or grape juice. If it's not wine or grape juice, it's not going to count. Yeah. So okay, so the emes is white wine. No, you can ask white wine for Kiddush, white wine for Dalit Kosos, white wine at a wedding. So again, halachically, there is a lechatchila, a preference that red wine is better for kos shel bracha, but certainly, absolutely, you are yotze with white wine. White wine is perfectly good for everything, and as you probably know, if you have children who get married, often under the chuppah, white wine is preferred, so it shouldn't make a dark stain on the kala's dress or whatever it is. So again, lechatchila, red wine is best, but white wine is certainly kosher. Yeah.
Is there a shear for
Okay, so now the question is, if you're Yotzei Kiddush, must you make Kiddush again when you come home? Okay, so again, I heard Kiddush Shabbos morning, and let's assume I ate the requisite cake or drank the requisite wine. So am I Yotzei Kiddush? I am. So now when I come home, what am I supposed to do? So, a few things. If there are people in your house who have not heard Kiddush yet, then 1,000% you can make Kiddush again for them. There's not a problem. Okay, that's simple. Let's say, however, everybody in your family and all of your guests heard Kiddush in Shul, and they ate in Shul. So nobody has a need for Kiddush. Should I make Kiddush again? According to the halacha, you do not have to. However, many people you do not have to make Kiddush again. You can go straight to Netilat Yadayim and make hamotzi if there's nobody who needs to hear Kiddush. However, many people do have the custom that they want to begin their meal with Kiddush, and Shabbos morning it is permitted, because after all, the only bracha you're making Shabbos morning is Berei Pri Hagafen, so you can do that. I'm having wine before my meal. Now, Friday night, however, in a rare case where they had a Friday night Kiddush, and you had cake, and everybody was Yotzei, you would not be allowed to make Kiddush again, because the bracha Mikadesh HaShabbat would be a bracha levatala, a bracha in vain, because you already were Yotzei. So Shabbos morning, there's no real problem with making Kiddush again, because all I'm doing is I'm making a bracha on the wine that I'm drinking before the meal, but the Friday night Kiddush cannot be recited again unless there is somebody who needs to be Yotzei with that Kiddush. Again, that's pretty rare that Friday night there was a Kiddush, but theoretically there might be such a thing. Okay, so this is kind of the general rules of the Kiddush B'Beit Knesset. So now I just want to mention a very interesting alternative reason for Kiddush in Shul, which contradicts the Gemara, so really it's problematical. How could a later commentary offer another interpretation? But it is offered. It is brought in the code of the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher ben Yechiel, in the name of Rabbeinu Yonah. Now, Rabbeinu Yonah was one of the great Rishonim. He was a nephew of the Ramban, or some say a cousin of the Ramban, and we know him best as the author of the classic work Sharei Tshuva, The Gates of Repentance, which is one of the great works on the mitzvah of tshuva and the idea of tshuva, and many people learn it. We should learn it the whole year, really, but many people learn it before Rosh Hashanah, Shana Yom Kippur and the like. But Rabbeinu Yonah was not just, he also wrote on Pirkei Avos and he wrote on Mishlei. So he's kind of known as a Musar person. He focused a lot on ethics and the like. But Rabbeinu Yonah was also one of the great masters of halacha as well. And we have writings in halacha that different Rishonim bring. And here's Rabbeinu Yonah has a very interesting take on why we recite Kiddush B'Beit Knesset. And this is what he says. He says that, yes, it's true that nobody is Yotzei Kiddush, because Ein Kiddush Ella B'Makom Seuda. But the requirement of Ein Kiddush Ella B'Makom Seuda is not a Torah requirement. It is a rabbinic requirement. And even though I told you that we derive it from a verse in Yeshayahu, the Navi, that itself is midrabanan, because halachically, a Navi cannot innovate a new commandments from God. If a Navi tells you to do something, technically, that's a rabbinic obligation. It's an early rabbinic obligation. Therefore, that actually means, da'oraisa, I am Yotzei Kiddush even if I don't eat. It's only a rabbinic requirement that I have to eat. Right? So that's point number one. Point number two, Rabbeinu Yonah says, is there are some people in Shul who might not come home and make Kiddush. Maybe they're not religious. So as a result, we make Kiddush in Shul, so at least the people who are not going to make Kiddush at home should fulfill a Torah obligation of Kiddush. Right? They're not Yotzei the complete Kiddush. They haven't fulfilled the rabbinic obligation of Kiddush. But they have fulfilled the Torah obligation of Kiddush. So that way, we're motzi them, so at least they have a mitzvah d'oraisa. So according to Rabbeinu Yonah, the purpose of Kiddush b'Beit Knesset is not for the people who eat there, but it's for the people who don't eat there, but who may not be making Kiddush at home. This way they're going to be Yotzei. Now the truth of the matter is, in many, many American synagogues, this is actually a real concern. In other words, the emes is Rabbeinu Yonah's position is a stronger reason today to say Kiddush in Shul than the reason of Orchim. We don't have Orchim who eat in the Shul that much. But certainly, even in many Orthodox synagogues, you're going to have people. I mean, not everybody is Shomer Shabbos, right? I mean, people come to the service, and they, well, in a way, it's a catch-22, though. In other words, I was going to say, well, they're not going to make Kiddush at home, so by making Kiddush in Shul, I'm motzi them. But it may actually work the other way around. They're not going to make Kiddush at home because they figure they're Yotzei in Shul. Meaning, if I wouldn't make it in Shul, they might make it at home. Who knows how people's minds work. It may work in funny ways. But this is the reason Rabbeinu Yonah gives. And this is actually very similar to something else we do in Judaism, and that is Chazarat Hashatz. Right? The Jewish liturgy. What happens is, we daven the Amidah, we daven the Shemona Esrei, and after we daven the Shemona Esrei, the Chazan repeats the whole thing. This is called Chazarat Hashatz, the repetition of the Shaliach Sibor. What is the purpose of Chazarat Hashatz? So the simple purpose was that there were people who would come to the Beis Knesset. They didn't know how to read. They were actually Shomer Shabbos. They didn't know how to read Hebrew. They weren't able to daven. They didn't know the tefillot by heart, and they couldn't read from whatever. It's not even clear they had a text, but they couldn't read from a text. So the Chazan would say the Amidah out loud to be motzi them in the Shemona Esrei, Mila b'Mila. And of course we have the same question. Today, that's not really an issue, because either people daven, or people can read the Shemona Esrei in English. You're Yotzei, reading it in translation. So why do we have Chazarat Hashatz, right? Why do we have Chazarat Hashatz? So once again, it's similar to what the Ramah said about Kiddush. This was a takana of the Chachamim. But in Brisk, the Soloveitchik family, they developed a whole conceptual structure of Chazarat Hashatz, in which they pointed out that there are two aspects to davening with the minyan. There is what is called tefillah b'tzibur, prayer within a congregation, and then there is what is called tefillat hatzibur, the prayer of the congregation. So when I daven the silent Amidah with a minyan, I am davening my private prayer together with other people. That's called the tefillah b'tzibur, but the Chazan is now standing as a representative of everybody and as a single unit of congregation. We are offering our prayer to God, and that's why the brisker custom was that for Chazarat Hashatz, the person, not just the Chazan, everybody, would stand with their legs together as if they were davening their own Shemona Esrei, because this is Tfilas Ha-Sibor. And that is why the argument goes that even though the original reason to be motzi people who didn't daven may have less application today, we have this new idea, or this newly expressed idea, of the tefillah of the tzibur. And that is actually why the halacha is pretty strict. People take advantage of this. The Shulchan Aruch says, anyone who talks during the he uses language that it doesn't use for Chilul Shabbos. It says, anyone who talks during the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, his gadol avono miniso. His sin is greater than he can bear. An awful avera of talking during Chazarat Hashatz. Because once again, logically, you wouldn't automatically think it's so wrong. You might say, hey, I davened already. What's the point here? So the Shulchan Aruch has to emphasize that you have to listen to that Amidah as well. I don't want to get into those halachas. Maybe that's a talk for another time. One major issue that people face is, am I allowed to learn during Chazarat Hashatz? Can I just pull out a sefer? Assuming I don't talk, I just want to learn. So the truth of the matter is, I I have to be honest, I do learn during Chazarat Hashatz, so I don't want to put myself up as a tzaddik. But the Mishnah Brura mentions there may be a basis to be lenient, but he's very much against it. He's very much against it. He says one should literally look in the siddur and follow along. Certainly like the briskers, for sure that's the case if you stand. But even if you're not following that idea of standing like the Amida, but one should sort of listen to what the Chazan is saying. So, once again, I will admit that I don't always live up to that standard, but I do have an achrayus to at least tell you what the official standard is. Okay. So the point I'm making is Rabbeinu Yonah's reason for Kiddush b'Beit HaKnesset somewhat mirrors the institution of Chazarat Hashatz. Now, you may ask another question, and that is, why is there only Chazarat Hashatz for Shachris and Mincha? Why is there no Chazarat Hashatz for Arvit? Arvit does not have Chazarat Hashatz. And once again, the Rush gives us a beautiful answer, because we actually paskin that the davening of the Amida of Arvit was not an obligation, it was a minhag. We paskin Tfilas Arvit is Reshut, it's not a chova. Now that doesn't mean today a person can say, I'm not going to daven Ma'ariv, at least a man. Actually, the Aruch HaShulchan says the reason why even women who daven twice a day usually do not daven Arvit is because even for a man it's a Reshut, so women did not accept this optional prayer. But for men, the Reshut has become chova because of minhag. So if your 15-year-old says he's not going to daven Ma'ariv because Tfilas Arvit Reshut, right? That's a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. He learned the Gemara. The answer is now it's a chova, but at its inception it was a Reshut, and because it was a Reshut, there is no Chazarat Hashatz, because if the guy didn't do it, it's not a big deal. It was an optional prayer. Now, by the way, Kriya Shema of Ma'ariv is a Doraisa. We're not talking about Shema. Shema for sure is Doraisa. We're just talking about the Amida of Ma'ariv. Okay. Nevertheless, in spite of that, we do have a sort of Chazarat Hashatz Friday night. Right, Friday night in the Beis Knesset, right, the Chazan has kind of an if you look at it, it's actually an abbreviated Chazarat Hashatz, and it's brought down that the Chachamim wanted because of the holiness of Shabbos to also have a kind of repetition of the Amida for those who were unable to daven. So the Magei Navos is actually, just go through it, you'll actually see it corresponds as a shorter version of the Arvit Amida of Friday night. Okay. Right, so this is, again, some general ideas about the idea of Kiddush b'Beis Knesset. So we have two different reasons. The Gemara's reason is for the Orchim who eat in the Shul, and Rabbeinu Yonah's reason is for the people who will not make Kiddush at home, and this way they are Yotzei the Kiddush D'Oraisa, even though it is not b'makam Suda. Yeah. Okay, so here we get into another problem. Let's look at the principle. Ein Kiddush ella b'makom Suda. Kiddush has to be in the place of your meal. Now, what's the place? Well, what's called the place? Now, obviously, if I hear Kiddush here, and I don't eat till I get home, that's totally invalid because I didn't make a Suda in the makom of the Kiddush. But what about different rooms in the same building? What if I make Kiddush here, and the food is in the next room, right? So you're not going to eat the cake until you go to the next room. Can you be Yotzei Kiddush in this room if you're going to eat in the next room? So the Ramah actually says that the rule is only if you can see the place where you eat. So for example, if there would be an opening, a doorway, and the cake is there, and when I make Kiddush, or actually it depends where you are, where you're standing, you could see the makom. Actually, you don't have to see the cake. You have to see the room where the cake is kept. If you could see, yeah.
Outside, the Kiddush is inside.
Oh, the Kiddush is inside, the food is outside. Yeah. No, I got you. So the question would be, can you see that outside area from where you are? If you can see the outside area from where you are, that is called one makom. Well, that's the simplest response. The simplest response would be, I eat the cake in the shul. Yeah, for them for sure. Okay. Well, listen, I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody, but in such a case, it's far better to make Kiddush outside. That would be the solution. If the food is outside, you make the Kiddush outside. If the Kiddush is inside, the food should be inside. You shouldn't have an inside-outside situation unless there's clear visibility to there. So that you need to know. Okay. So now, let me go a little further. It turns out that Kiddush b'makom Seuda is not a Torah requirement. It is a rabbinic requirement. Okay. There's another thing that's a rabbinic requirement too, according to the Rambam. This is the Rambam. The Rambam says, Kiddush on wine or grape juice, or, actually, let me get that. We know that Kiddush can be made on wine, Kiddush can be made on grape juice, Kiddush Friday night only, I'll explain why, can even be made on bread. Right, how does that work? You wash your hands before Kiddush, you make al netilat yadayim, and when you make Kiddush, you say hamotzi lechem menot, you don't eat, and then you make the Kiddush, in other words, and you eat the bread. Kiddush Friday night can be made on bread. Kiddush Shabbos morning, as an aside, cannot be made on bread. And the reason that is so, again, this is a psak of the Rush that the Shulchan Aruch brings, is that Kiddush Friday night has a whole long bracha, Mekadesh Shabbos. Kiddush Shabbos morning, the only bracha you're making is Berei Pri Hagafen. Right, the paragraph of V'Shamru is really optional. Now, if Shabbos morning I recite Kiddush by just saying Hamotzi, it's no different than any bread meal I would make during the week. Meaning, let's assume I want to make Kiddush Shabbos morning on bread. So what do? I wash my hands, I make olive oil, I make hamotzi. What does that show? You do the same thing on Monday or Wednesday. There has to be a hecker, there has to be some type of recognition that you're doing something special in honor of Shabbos. So Friday night, even if I make it on bread, the hecker is the bracha mekadesh HaShabbos. But Shabbos morning, if I make it on bread, there is no hecker. So that's why the poskim say that Shabbos morning you cannot use bread. So Friday night it's wine, grape juice, bread. Shabbos morning it's wine, grape juice, and some say whiskey, or beer, or even beer. Some say that. Some actually say even soda or apple juice. That's called Chamar Medina. Okay, but bread not. You cannot do it on bread because there is no hecker. But says the Rambam that the requirement of making it on something, on wine, on grape juice, on bread, on whiskey, is in itself only D'Rabbanan. Because what is the origin of the mitzvah of Kiddush? Zachor, the fourth commandment of the 10 Aseret Dibros. Zachor es Yom HaShabbos l'kadsho. Remember the day of Shabbos to keep it holy. And Chazal say that's Kiddush. It doesn't say wine, it doesn't say anything. So the Rambam actually says not only is Kiddush b'makom Seuda midrabanan, but even Kiddush on wine or bread or grape juice, whatever it is midrabanan. Based on this, the Magen Avram, the great commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, draws a fascinating conclusion. The Rambam doesn't say this explicitly, but the Magen Avram extrapolates from the Rambam that every person who davened Arvit, Leil Shabbat, has fulfilled the mitzvah of Kiddush on a Torah level. Why is that so? Because in the Arvit, I said Vayechulu, I acknowledged that God created the world in 6 days and rested on Shabbos. Now it's true that there's no wine, there's no bread, but I'm Yotzei D'Oraisa. Which means, fascinatingly, it is the Magen Avram's position that every man who comes home, assuming the man davened Arvit, man or woman, actually, it's whoever, again, it's less common for women to go to Beit Knesset, but many women do go. So whether it's a man or a woman, anyone who comes home, Or even if they daven b'yechidut. Anyone who davened Arvit Leil Shabbat has fulfilled the mitzvah of Kiddush on a Torah level, and the only reason they have to make Kiddush again, actually there are two reasons, is because of the rabbinic requirement of Kiddush on wine or bread, and the rabbinic requirement of Kiddush b'makom suda. Right, I'll get to that. And now remember, just be sure you got this straight, don't confuse Rambam's statement with Magen Avram's statement, because you'll see that they are actually slightly different. The Rambam does indeed say Kiddush on wine or bread is rabbinic. D'oraisa, you're Yotze with a declaration of Shabbos without wine or bread. The Rambam says that. It is the Magen Avraham who therefore extrapolates that the davening of Arvit, Leil Shabbat, will be as good as a Kiddush D'oraisa. Now, you'll see in a moment that there are Acharonim that question that extrapolation. The Mishnah Berurah brings, for example, Chafetz Chaim, Mishnah Berurah brings that the Gemara in Masarvei Psachim says that there are certain textual requirements for Kiddush, and one of the textual requirements of Kiddush is that you mention that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, that you combine Kedushat Shabbat with Zecher Lietziat Mitzrayim. Now, how do we know that? This is from a Gezerah Shava. What is a Gezerah Shava? It's one of the 13 principles of interpretation that Rabbi Yishmael articulated in terms of how Chazal interprets a biblical text. And Gezerah Shava simply means if the same word is used in two different places, the Chachamim were given the power to compare them. Now, obviously, that's subject to a lot of abuse. You could take the word S, like SS, or Vayomer. So, Gezerah Shavas have a lot of rules. It's not as, free for all as you would think, but there is a principle of Gezerah Shava. Now, here we have a Gezerah Shava. The fourth commandment says, Zachor es Yom HaShabbos lekadesho. Remember the day of Shabbos to keep it holy. And it says by Yetzias Mitzrayim, Zachor, same word, Zachor es hayom hazeh asher yatzasem mi Mitzrayim. Remember the day that you left Mitzrayim. So the Gezerah Shava is Zachor. It says Zachor by Shabbos, and it says Zachor by Yetzias Mitzrayim. So from here, Chazal derive that Yetzias Mitzrayim has to be incorporated in your Zechirat Shabbos. So says the Mishnah Berurah, a fascinating point. He differs with the Magen Avram. Even if the Rambam says you don't need wine, you don't need bread, you don't need grape juice, you don't need whiskey, you need a mention of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And in the Friday night Arvit, which talks about Shabbos, Vayechulu, there is no mention of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Therefore, according to the Mishnah Berurah, when I come home, I'm still obligated in Kiddush D'oraisa. But then the Mishnah Berurah says a fascinating point. When it's Yom Tov davening, this is really very interesting. In the Arvit of a Yom Tov, whether it's during the week or Shabbos, you say Vatitein Lanu Hashem Elokeinu Biyava. So let's assume it's Shabbos and Yom Tov. Shabbosos L'Menucha, Moadim L'Simcha, Chagim Uzmanim L'Sason, Es Yom HaShabbos Hazeh, Es Yom Chag HaMatzos Hazeh, Zman Cheruseinu, Biyava Mikra Kodesh, Bingo, Zecher, Lietzias Mitzrayim. So there, the Mishnah Berurah says, yeah, the Magen Avram is right. When I come home to the Seder, I may have been Yotzei Kiddush on a Torah level, because there, the mention of Shabbat and the mention of Yom Tov was in conjunction with Yetziat Mitzrayim. But the Mishnah Berurah says that's only true in a Chag davening, a Yom Tov davening. That is not true for a Friday night davening. So therefore, the Mishnah Berurah concludes, you're going to see why this is important, because You may ask, well, who cares if it's D'Oraisa or D'Rabbanan? But it is going to be kind of important to identify this for the reason that you said. Therefore, the Mishnah Berurah concludes that even according to the Rambam, that wine and grape juice and whiskey and bread is all D'Rabbanan, you're still not going to be Yotzei with the Arvit of Leil Shabbat, because it does not mention Shabbat in conjunction with Yitziat Mitzrayim. Yeah. Right. So the answer basically is that this is one of the ways that we honor the Shabbat as a special occasion, meaning the Chachamim wanted you to kind of honor the occasion, just like you would say, an honored guest comes to your house. So you might say, let's bring out the spread or whatever it would be. It's a symbolic gesture to give kavod to the Shabbos Malka or the Yom Tov Malka. And therefore the Chachamim enacted that it be connected. Same thing with the wedding. If you think about this, why do we have wine for everything? Like, why do you have a cup of wine at a bris? Why do you have a cup of wine under a chuppah? There's no a bris is kosher without the wine, and a Kiddushin is kosher without the wine. Yeah, but part of it also is that okay, that may explain a wedding. That doesn't explain a bris necessarily. There is no mitzvah to have simcha at a bris. We're happy. Of course we're happy, but there's no particular mitzvah of simcha. In fact, let me again point out a very interesting difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. Again, if you remember your prior life, and you remember a bris that you attended or had in your own family, Shechiyanu is not recited at a bris in Chutz La'aretz. We recite two brachas. The Mayel recites Al Hamila, and then the father recites another bracha, La'achniso, to bring my child to the bris of Avram, and then we immediately say in the bracha, we bless them, Kishem, Shenichnas the bris, as he was brought to the bris, may you bring him to Torah and Chuppah and Masim Tovah. Now in Eretz Yisrael, sometimes it's embarrassing if you're a Chutz La'aretz person, you're so used to shouting out, Kishem, Shenichnas the bris, when there's another bracha that's still being said. It's happened to me a few times too, and that is, they say Shechayanu at a bris. In Eretz, you're not going to hear it in Chutz La'aretz. Now, why is that so? So once again, the Ramah says, our minhag, the Ashkenazic minhag, was not to recite Shechiyanu at a bris because the baby is suffering some pain. And because the baby is suffering some pain, we don't want to celebrate so much. In Eretz Yisrael, life is tough. So, he's suffering, okay, so what, This is life. Get used to it, and rejoice even when life is a little bit tough. So what's interesting is that there's not necessarily a mitzvah of simcha at a bris, but it's kavod, it's honoring the bris by doing something that causes simcha. Even pidyon haben, there's less of a chiyuv, but it's also customary to make a berei pri hagafen on a cup of wine. Yeah. Absolutely not. You can make Kiddush for someone who didn't hear it 10,000 times. You can do it over and over and over and over again. And this is the very important message. Rashi explains in Maseches Rosh Hashanah that my ability to recite Kiddush 100 times, and it's not a blessing in vain, not a bracha levatala, is because Kol Yisrael Arev Zelazah. That means every Jew is responsible for every other Jew. So if there's one person in the world who has not heard Kiddush, my mitzvah is not complete. So I can do it because if you didn't hear Kiddush, then in some ways I didn't hear Kiddush. So that's absolutely not a problem. Although I will discuss the man-woman issue. All of this is really a long introduction to some things we will focus on. If you repeat Kiddush? Absolutely yes. So in a way that will help you make your quota. In Shabbat, there's a problem of 100 brachos, right? Everyone understands this. There is an inyan. Maybe it's not an obligation, but there's an important inyan that we try to recite 100 brachos every day. Now, if you daven 3 amidos during the week, that already gives you 57. You get 57 brachos from the 3 Shemona Esreis. Each one is 19 brachos. On Shabbos, you have 4 Shemona Esreis, but each one only has 7. So instead of 57 brachos, you only have 28 brachos. So you're missing quite a lot. So on Shabbos there's a shortfall of the Mea Brachos. That's the excuse to eat more, to make brachos on food, and the like. But you're right, if you happen to have to repeat Kiddush multiple times, each one counts towards your Mea Brachos.
Chazarat Hashatz, as you said, doesn't count.
So Chazarat Hashatz, yeah. So that's an interesting point. Can I, if I daven, can I use Chazarat Hashatz? The Chazan for sure could. That's not a question. The question is, can I be mechaven that they should be my brachas? Some say b'diavad that might work as well. L'chatchila, it's better to do your own, but b'diavad you could be yotzei.
The question is, on any bracha, you hear a bracha from somebody, you say,
No, that would count. But the difference, no. The difference is this: if I hear a bracha that somebody's motzi me, so if somebody makes kiddush for 10 people, all 10 people get the credit of those brachas in their Mea brachas. But the question is, if I simply hear a bracha that I'm not being yotzei with, it may not count. So the question is Chazarat Hashatz a bracha that I'm yotzei with? So that would depend on the brisker idea that it's a tfilas hatzibur. You see, but if I hear you make a bracha on a glass of water, that doesn't count. I mean, I say amen, but it's not a bracha I made. You're not motzing me with that bracha.
say like the Birkat Kohanim in Shul said our own, what we can say.
Yeah, it's not because of the Mea Brachos. It's just because of the mitzvah. Amen is a tremendous mitzvah. Answering Amen. You know, there were Gedolim who had a shita. Some people, even today, even people who are not Gedolim, they try very much that every bracha they make, there should be somebody who answers Amen. So they tell a story about Rav Chaim Volozhiner. Rav Chaim Volozhiner, the great Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, would never make a bracha unless somebody could answer. So if he got up in the middle of the night and was thirsty, he would not drink water if somebody wasn't there. So one time he got up like 3 a.m, and he was ravenously thirsty. But he didn't want to wake up anybody in his house. So he really was B'tsar Gadol. And all of a sudden there's a knock at the door. And one of his Talmidim from the yeshiva of Volozhin says, "Oh, Rabbi, I saw the light on in the house. I saw the candle on in the house, so I figured you were up. I wanted to ask you a shayla. Can I ask you a shayla?" So Rav Chaim Volozhiner says, "Yes, wonderful. But let me drink some water first." So the next morning at Shachris, he sees the boy and goes over to the boy and says, "You know, it was so wonderful that you came. I was so thirsty." And the boy looked at him with a blank face and says, "Rabbi, I was not at your house." So what happened was Eliyahu Hanavi came, just like with Avram, right? Avram wanted Orchim, but it was too hot for Orchim, so Hashem makes the angels come. Hashem made Eliyahu Hanavi come in the demus of a Talmud. Now the truth is, that must mean the Talmud must be very special, though. If Eliyahu Hanavi, if that is the person Eliyahu Hanavi decides to become. But you see that Eliyahu Hanavi doesn't only come for big missions. Eliyahu Hanavi comes, so Rav Chaim Volozhiner will be able to have a drink of water in the middle of the night.
I don't know when it's getting the
Yes.
counting.
No. Okay, so again, let me clarify this. Answering Amen is a great mitzvah. It's a great, powerful mitzvah. But it doesn't count towards your 100 brachos. That's all I'm saying. These are two different cheshbonos. One is the mitzvah of Amen, which is a great mitzvah. The other is, did you say 100 brachos? And that, unless they're motzi. If I'm making kiddush for you or something, then it counts for you and for me.
But what if the woman's saying the bracha and you're saying amen? What if she meant it for everyone to hear?
Well, it's not up to her, more or less. Meaning, if she's not helping you fulfill a mitzvah that you have to make a bracha for, the pashtus, it would not count. Anyway, there is a machlokas generally if women have the inyan of Mea brachas. That's an interesting question as well. Some say women don't have this obligation, but still, it's a proper thing for men and women to try to do. Okay, we'll stop here and have a